And we're live. Welcome back to the weekly Roundup, June edition. Something is in the ether because I posted a rant video and then immediately had a similar conversation with three yogapreneurs. And then Terry and Carol were expressing that they've had similar conversations. Maybe it's just because we're coming into summer, like the sort of gritty, discipline, belief, mission-based something from the owners down in the studio right now can be shaken a little bit as we move into this season. So we're kind of getting that feel from things. So Terry, why don't you kick us off? Because that's where maybe we'll start our conversation today.
Well, I had, and Josh, if you could post the link, I'll make a note here.
Post it.
Yeah. So just the thought that I've heard this, a number of times, and I certainly think I had that mindset when I owned my studio, is that somehow the teachers are doing me a favor by teaching for me. Is like somehow the job of teaching a yoga class does not have the same importance as a real job, right? And I hear this like, well, my teachers all have full-time jobs, or they all have this, or they all have that. And it's almost like I feel like they think that they're doing them a favor, and I'm afraid to ask them to do things and this and that. I understand that, there's that time where if you ask them or push them to do things, the fear is genuine that then they're not going to teach. And all of a sudden you own a yoga studio and you don't have teachers to teach. And your fear, end up having to teach all those classes. I would almost argue better to be in that position than have teachers that are not fully engaged and not fully committed, because somehow the owner has let them off the hook. So if the mindset is, oh, this isn't a real job, or they have more important jobs to do, then perhaps, whether it's consciously or subconsciously, that percolates throughout your studio, your community with your teachers. And I would argue that this is one of the most important jobs that someone can have, other than perhaps being a school teacher for young minds, right? Where you're molding people and shaping people. It's like we're helping people discover their best versions of themselves. I know all of us as studio owners I could think of a bunch of people that have said to me, you've saved my life, or you changed my life. It's not like we did, but the community, the studio that was there to support them to find those changes. What can be more important than that? For people to discover their inner, whether it's peace, happy, whatever it is, how is that somehow less important than someone, let's say, who works for Microsoft or Google, or, whatever, fill in the blank? It's just, are we setting ourselves up a little bit for problems down the road if we approach it as they're doing me a favor? Because they're not, because you pay them, right? You pay them. So it's not a favor, it's a job. And, on Josh's rant, I posted and I mentioned that I watched the docuseries on Netflix on Arnold Schwarzenegger. And it's fascinating. If you have Netflix, I highly recommend it. If you don't, sign up and cancel right away for a month, because he just really talks about, having that clear vision and working towards it, and having your goals and working towards those goals, and not letting, the naysayers come after you. And it really is up to you to get stuff done. And if you're not getting it done, then that's your problem, nobody else's. So it just sort of it was like, when Josh posted that rant yesterday, I immediately thought about that. And anyway, so that's just sort of where I'm at. It's like, why do we have that mindset? Where perhaps it kind of goes hand in glove with the mindset of, we've talked about before, somehow yoga studios shouldn't be profitable, that they shouldn't make money. I mean, it's sort of all, I think, a little bit interconnected. So perhaps my rant for today is, let's shift our thinking. And there are certainly yogapreneurs who have that mindset. But if you're like thinking, fall in that more, I'm just afraid, or this and that, it's like, how can we help you shift your mindset? Josh, you had your hand up and then you put it down.
Carol, you go ahead.
Yeah, I think it's interesting because as the owners, we almost assume that because they're part-time and they only maybe teach once or twice a week, that they wouldn't be interested in bettering the business. And that's a I mean, poor assumption, right? Because they're there for a reason. I think getting your team buy-in is really part of this picture, and something that we did. I remember early 2020, we had everyone come with their why, which we've talked about before. I'm sure a lot of people are aware of it, but if you ask your team about why are you here, what made you want to be a part of the team, what drew you to the studio in the first place, we had a big team meeting, everyone brought their why, many people shared, people were crying, like it reminds everybody of what the purpose of the studio is. And I mean, it felt like it bonded everybody in such a way that we had our strongest team ever moving forward. So that's what it brings up for me, like getting that team buy-in. And then, yeah, of course, they're going to want to come in for a training because it's going to make the studio better and save more lives and, grow the team as a whole. Something random, so random about goal setting though. Go with me on this journey. I watched The Housewives. Okay, judge all you want, but I love The Housewives. One of them in particular, she already has her Emmy and I want to say, her Grammy. She wants to do the EGOT and get the Emmy, Tony, Grammy, Oscar, I think it is. So this year she's like putting in place her plan to get her EGOT, and it struck me because I thought, oh, that just happens to people, right? No, she's planning it out, and now she's getting stuff on Broadway so she can get her Tony. So it struck me that kind of like Arnold Schwarzenegger, that brought it up for me, is that like you plan it, you go for it, you have a clear vision. Even housewives do it. So, random thought.
And that's brilliant because exactly what you said, because one of the things Arnold talks about, he's like, I don't know, 16 or 17 years old. And when he gets on this path and he visualized being Mr. Olympic, or at that point, and saw himself on stage, saw himself with the crowd going, Arnold, Arnold, Arnold. And he achieved that when he was only 20 years old. And so it's the same thing. He like set that in his mind and he worked for it. He visualized it. He lived that moment. And he manifested it. So yeah, I love that rabbit hole, Carol. Thanks.
It does relate to all of it. The thing that you were in this conversation that was coming to mind for me, Terry, when you were mentioning this, is like in any business, like in my opinion and experience, it literally doesn't matter what the business is, but a yoga studio is like the best example of this. Somebody has to be the all-in, I've drunk the Kool-Aid, inspirational source of the whole thing. Someone has to do that. And it's interesting that a studio owner might put hundreds of thousands of dollars into investment into a build out in a studio or buying a building, have spent tens of thousands of dollars on a training, put in thousands of hours of blood, sweat, and tears to get the thing going, and then be like, I don't know if I can ask my staff to come for an hour training on 3 weeks from now. Like, if you look at it just totally logically from the outside, that's insane. It doesn't make any sense. And if you look at and approach energetically your business that way, then I don't want to, if Alex is the person running the studio and he's like, never asked me to do anything and I'm just running my own ship, and then one day he's like, hey, do you think maybe it wasn't too much trouble, but it's not mandatory that you can maybe come in and like we'll just talk a little bit about how to talk to people at the front desk? And I'm like, I don't know, I'm kind of busy on Fridays. And he's like, okay, why would I enter that business next week and then be an inspired, highly active, trying to help drive things forward person, So it does sort of percolate through the whole thing if someone isn't really driving it forward in that way. So I think, whereas the reverse is also true. You don't need them to drink the Kool-Aid of your business to the same level that you do because it's not their business. On the other hand, you have to be such a definitive source of inspiration that like at some point, no one would even challenge you on your belief around your business. The teaching all the classes example, one of the things that I think Jenna and I were able to do well in our business when we were hiring teachers was everyone knew, like, we had already done it for 2 years at the schedule level we were at. Like, I don't give a shit if I've got to teach every single class, I will do it. So there's no such thing as showing up late for your class, because I'll take you off the schedule and I'll teach it. Not because there was some ultimatum or threat around that, but it was like, that's how important the business was to us. And we would do anything that it took to make that happen while maintaining a quality bar. So everyone had to rise to that level, basically. And the most powerful studios out there, that tends to be the case. Not necessarily the specificity of the owners teaching all the classes, but just that, like, there's this quality bar that's in line with the bigger mission of what the studio is doing. So I'll leave you with this thought. We talk about this in sales. Terry and I have been traveling to studios and doing a lot of sales trainings and conversation around this. So it comes out there, but on the bigger scale, this is the same thing. The idea is this, it's the challenge question that you have to ask yourself as an owner. If you are not willing to ask your team for help, if you're not willing to inspire your team to action, if you're not willing to, like, hold the standard of the quality bar of the product that your business is curating, do you actually believe in your mission? And that sounds maybe a tiny bit harsh, but it kind of just comes back to that if you really believe the words that are coming out of your own mouth about saving the world and what you're doing and how your yoga can improve the things and etc., or the money that you personally want to make, or that lifestyle or whatever else, then just move towards that. There's nothing that should block you from that, basically. That's my challenge question for today. All right. Alex, what did you do to inspire? I mean, I think that your history personally, but then also with the students you've worked with, you do a great job of, like, analytically looking at what needs to happen with pay and everything with the staff, but then that requires selling them on, here's how we're going to do it, which is sort of a form of inspiration. What's been your experience with sort of inspiring the team around taking action?
Yeah, so I think that every situation is different. I think the elephant in the room, of course, is, are your teachers independent contractors or are they employees, and what's your agreement, and how did you hire them? So if they're employees, what was the agreement when you hired them? I think a lot of the mistake in the industry is that the studio owners, newer studio owners, hire teachers not knowing they're going to really need the buy-in from the teachers. And so 18 months into it, they're feeling behind. And then they're trying to get the teachers to do more. And the teachers are like, well, I just teach yoga and I teach at 5 different studios, etc. So I think sometimes that's a problem. I personally found it most powerful with, an upwards of 30 plus teachers on the schedule or circling the studio at times, and much easier to just allow the yoga teachers to be yoga teachers and hire staff to run the place and message and sales. That was for me because there was lots and lots of great yoga teachers out there that loved to teach in our space, but had no real interest in making sales, etc. Although I think that, it can work both ways. If you have a small, tight team of, let's say, 8 to 12 teachers teaching 6+ classes each, getting them all to buy in and be on the same page can be really helpful. But for me personally, it was easier to have a small group of staff handle everything inside the studio. And then, of course, I think with inspiration, as Josh had asked about, would be a lot just by leadership, right? Inspiring your teachers to kind of do the right thing to the best of their ability within the time and bandwidth that they had, by being a presence in the studio. That's my experience.
So just going back to what you said about, obviously having strong agreements, teacher agreements in place. And I know with the difference, like, between independent contractors and employees. However, could you not, and of course, I'm not a lawyer, and if we want to check, we can check with Corey Sterling, who's actually going to be doing a webinar for us in the YC next month on the 25th of July. Anyway, is, can't you, in your independent contractor agreement, as long as they're understand you're contracting them to do, obviously teach yoga, but in part of that could be in teaching yoga is doing these other things like being involved in this or being involved in this or a monthly staff meeting or something like that. If that's written into the IC contract, could you still not say they're independent contractors? Because they know going in that this is something that's part of being a contractor with that yoga studio.
Yeah,
Right?
I think that's a little difficult. Just because it's written in an independent contract agreement doesn't mean that it follows the state or
Yeah,
location law. So what to do, when to do, how to do,
right.
you know, how much to do, those things become really challenging.
Yeah. Yeah, I suppose you're right. I just, like I said, I was just thinking if you could have some things in there that are required beyond just teaching. Because one could argue that these are things that you need to have to be an effective teacher. Is more than just teaching the class. It's supporting, I don't know, maybe it's a fine line gray area, but it's just a thought that that came to me. So yeah. Yeah, Josh.
I think I know what I'm talking about here. Well, we always go back to, and maybe this is way off kilter from what you guys are just saying. We always go back to every member of your team on your org chart, or you could call it your accountability chart, needs to have clarity around the outcome they are responsible for and how they are going to be sort of judged on their success. And then the deeper layer is, how do they actually accomplish that? Like, what do they need to do for that to happen? So one of the things with a yoga teacher, as an easy example, is there's maybe a reframe sometimes necessary in the studio when we work with them, where the yoga teacher has been sort of contracted, regardless of the technicalities of how they're paid or anything, to teach a yoga class, and they literally view their job as only that. My job's to show up, and from this hour to this hour during the class time, that's really my responsibility. And I'm going to teach the class how I see fit and how I like it. And then that's it. And I'm going to leave. And most of them organically care about their students enough that like they show up before, they engage, et cetera, et cetera. But then when you're like, well, no, I think you should do this, it's incongruent in their mind from like, well, I think I'm supposed to do this and you're telling me to do that. And I don't know if I'm paid for that. And like, that's where the friction all comes in. So sometimes you have to kind of go right back to zero and say, like, clean slate, line in the sand, whatever. This is now what we do. Here are the expectations. This is why, this is your real purpose, etc. The example being, in my opinion, a teacher's job is not to teach a yoga class. That's just what they do. That's the task. Their job is to convince students to want to practice yoga. So that is a little bit more expansive than just the posture sequencing you put together or the tone that you use or whatever. Although those things help and are part of that, they're not the only factors in it. So if you help them reframe, then these other things become more organically part of the conversation anyways. And the other way to look at this structurally on the macro level is, if a teacher, you really just need them to like welcome new students, teach a great class, follow up after the class, and that's it. And then you can supplement that by having a great front end sales team, like a front desk or studio assistant team. That's a good method as well. So this goes back to, we rant about this a lot on the Roundup. What is the vision, the mission, with the goal that you're trying to achieve? What's the problem that's stopping you from that? And then like figure out how to solve that. So it's either getting your team on board or hiring someone else and restructuring or training, or like there's a lot of different ways to approach it, but get that clarity first. And going back to our original thing, that clarity, it's something that you have to get really strong on as the owner and just drive forward.
Kind of think, it makes me think that, you know, a lot of times we hear, and I certainly was the same way, is I don't feel like I can afford to have front desk. Right. And, you know, when you're starting out, especially, or if things are tough or times are tight, like they have certainly been for a lot of us, is maybe flipping that thinking is like, how can I afford not to have some? And maybe it's not necessarily front desk staff. Maybe it is, okay, I'm not going to be able to have someone at every shift, but what could I have? I could have someone maybe 5-6 hours a week just doing like nurture, like making phone calls and following up with people, and make it really a sales role. And then the reality there is, if that's what you can afford, maybe they work like the 2 most busiest desk shifts there are. Everybody, there's usually a couple that are like the super is busy, whether it's a Saturday morning, whatever it is, that person will pay for it themselves. And then if they're doing other things like doing the follow-up phone calls and doing like the sales process, and partly how you can compensate them is some type of base, like an hourly rate plus commissions based upon performance. So in actuality, if that you get that person, and let's say you're paying them $20 an hour and they're working 10 hours a week, that's $200 times 4.2 is 2,468, like $900 a month. Let's just call it an even $1,000 a month with payroll taxes and everything. If that person gets in their first 6 weeks, gets 10 people to sign up for membership at $100 a plate, that person's paid for.
Yeah.
Then everything after that is going right to the bottom line. Right. So looking at it that way, maybe it makes a little like, oh, all they need to do is sell X number of memberships and their salary is covered. And I kind of did that a little bit in reverse. So when I first bought my studio, I knew what my monthly expenses were. At the time I bought it, I had 35 members, which I processed manually because I didn't have a computer system. So my very first goal was, I knew what my monthly expenses were. So my very first goal was, okay, I'm gonna have enough members to cover my monthly expenses. Right. And I did that by the end of year 1, I had made that goal. Right. But it's like, and then after that, it was all, additional. So anyway, so looking at it, perhaps not, it's a lot like coaching. Is coaching an expense, or is it really an investment in my business? I looked at it as an investment in my business. And,
It's absolutely an investment.
It's an absolute, I would not have been able to get to the level I wanted to, that I got to. And I bet you every one of us can say the same thing without having a coach, because I viewed it as an investment and it more than paid for itself. Absolutely more than paid. So perhaps that's a little flip in thinking, thinking about, okay, how many hours, how much I'm going to pay. Man, if they sell this amount in the first month, they're covered. So then it becomes a little bit more palatable, or maybe, okay, less anxiety around it. And I did have one of my, Kristen Sapp at Orange Lotus in Exton, PA. She finally got her first front desk staff person we've been talking about for a while. And then she said, why did I wait so long to get this person? Why did I wait so long? Now we're planning to hire another one. Right. So it's just something to think about too. A little bit of a
I would say to the front desk point, if I was starting a studio from zero right now today, I would have myself, 2 teachers, and at least 1, if not 2, front desk. That would be the order at which I would hire, because you can't teach all the classes. You need to free that time up. But like, you just need 2 really rock star bought in teachers, maybe 3, depending on how many classes you're going to run. But then past that, there's no more advantage to having a bunch of extra teachers. And there's insane advantage to having 2 really good front desk people, the face of the studio. They're the extension of you when you're not there doing the sales and stuff. So it's interesting in the industry that hiring area is not controversial, but that people have some reluctance around it. The ROI on that is not like you double your money back from hiring this person. If you actually get them doing what they need to do, we're talking like 1,000x on any expense for anyone who's good at the front desk. And we also are in a moment, it'll take us in a slightly different direction that I'd be curious about your guys' thoughts on a bit here. We're also in a moment where, for the first time not in history, you could have done this circa 2015 and on, but for the first time, there's like a real pretty straightforward, easy ability to have a slightly decentralized team. So one of the questions that comes up often is like having a virtual assistant. And I think that that is a very realistic answer to helping with administrative duties and standard operating procedure level tasks that are highly repetitive. And there are certain things, and this is where it gets a little bit strange. There are certain things, for example, we have a preferred partner coming into the mix here pretty soon that offers this service, and that's why they're a preferred partner. We've been vetting them, where their team of highly trained people will plug into your system and they will do all of the outreach as if they're your studio. So the outreach being like the manual text, the manual email, the pick up the phone and phone them during the intro. And their whole goal is anyone that you have in your system, until they're on your MRR, we're going to keep chasing them down basically. And the thing that was interesting is I did the calculation, Terry, that you're describing. You know, they're about, I think it's 2,000 to 2,500 a month, depending on the program you're on with them. But at $20 an hour, what you're getting for that is the equivalent of hiring someone for like 25 hours a week. But then you have to train that person and they've got to be on it all the time. And if they don't work out and don't have the ROI, you have to fire them and offboard them and get the next thing. So like, whereas that service, this is a professional company that does that. It's a month-to-month contract. It's like, I think you have to do 3 months because it takes them a minute to get going. You keep all of the systems that they build in place afterwards. It's just an example of how we can get a little more creative with the yoga studio now when it comes to task management and who we're hiring and outcomes. And I would debate that this philosophy of approach actually empowers the whole team, because if you can say as an owner, Terry's here assigning every class in and making sure the conversations are happening. I'm doing marketing on the backside to get people in the doors. This company's here, like they're phoning every single first visit that comes in and the follow through. If all of that's taking place, and then we're like, we're going to use FitGrid, for example, and hey, teacher, I need you to do this follow-up afterwards. You're like, I don't want to do the follow-up. We're like, dude, like, it's going to make it really obvious that they're not participating in the bigger vision of what's going on. And that is a good reason to have a conversation with them about their belief in what you're all doing. Remembering that our hiring criteria, I just hired a new executive assistant. You guys will get to meet her. I'm sure she'll come in. For those of you who haven't heard, Michelle is my executive assistant. She's moving on to something else because she's actually a professional musician and she's got a big gig for that. But that aside, in that hiring process, after the initial resume of like, technically, do I think you can do this? Check, check, check. Cool. The only other things that matter, and in a yoga studio, I think this is very true. Do we share the same core values or the same vision, right? Are you trainable? Do I like you? That's it. And the like you part, we could say, are you a internal culture fit? Are you going to fit with the team? Be the other way to say that. So I think that, yeah, I don't know. I'm going to end it there. That's it. That's all that's left. Carol, I know you had your hand up. Go ahead.
Well, I wasn't sure if we could go back. What when you started to speak, what was brought up for me was, I think, we tend to be owners, but we just taught classes and we just love yoga. And then we want to open a yoga studio and spread that, right? So for me in the beginning, I didn't even know how to, like, what would my desk staff look like? What would I have them do other than just check people in and clean the bathrooms? Like, how were they going to actually turn into something that would help the business in a way, like, as far as like selling packages and, all those things. So I think that's where coaching came in for me, which was like, oh, okay, I need them to do the X, Y, and Z. There's a lot of follow-up that we can do. This is going to turn over, into more memberships. And so I think that was part of my block in the beginning. It's like, I didn't want to hire anybody because yes, I can check people in and I can clean the bathrooms as the studio owner. And, of course it's my time, but looking at it now, that wasn't the best use of my time. And I could train a desk person to do these sales, et cetera. So I think that was sort of just my thought process on like hiring the support that you need. So that's all I wanted to say. Josh?
No, it's really important to go back and like hindsight's 2020. That's one of the advantages. Like any YC coach that you guys experience, for those of you who are new to the network, has run a for-profit, profitable, successful yoga business. So we have stood there at the desk. We've had the thought that Carol's talking about, like, should I hire this person? Can I afford to hire this person? We've done that. And we have our collective knowledge of talking that through and everything as well. Plus now the advantage of having worked with literally thousands of studios all over the world. So it's a normal thing. And the reason I'm saying that is, like, when you find yourself in those moments of like, like, can I do this? Should I do that? How would I do this? Someone else has done that. So like, you're not alone. And it's a good time to bring that up and post a question and talk it through and sort of, figure out how to do that. The other thing, just to get a tiny bit into the weeds, Carol, on what you're saying that was triggering for me, was sometimes we wait so long to do some of these hires. Let's use the front desk as the example, that then when we do, we have these enormous aspirations for the role, because we're like, okay, they're going to do all these admin tasks that I don't want to do, and they're going to do this, and they're going to do that. And then you're looking for this unicorn, which you either don't find, or you think you find, and then they disappoint you, or realistically, the person you want is like someone who owns their own studio. So it's, I think, important to also realize that part of making sure that your business is sound goes to all of the staff conversation, which is selling them on the bigger vision and mission, and realizing that it's a process you're going to take them through. When you first hire a front desk person, their capacity is likely going to be, I can sign the class in and be really pleasant to people and clean the bathrooms, like we said, and that's it. And if you look at just that, then you're right. Maybe it's not worth it, although I still think it is. But that's just the starting point. It's realizing, like, that's actually enough to alleviate some pressure off of you. And then as they get really good at that, their capacity increases. In the first week, that is like barely what they can do. But by week 6, like, then they can make a phone call, then they can do this thing, then they can answer an email. By 3 months, now they can do all these other things. Like, their capacity as a human increases within your business the more you continue to work with them. So this is just like building your business, where you're writing out standard operating procedures and you're trying to build up your membership and everything else. You're also building up the people in your business in this way. And that is what the business is. That's just the process that you're going through. So it's having that larger vision for those hires, I think, as well, helps to alleviate the stress of the hire and understand, like, it's a process we're going through. Let's go through that process, rather than, I'm going to hire you and I need this outcome right now. You need clarity on what the ultimate outcome is, but we'll keep tweaking as we go to get to there. Go ahead, Alex.
Yeah, I think part of the challenges is so many people just really don't have the perspective of the reality of what it takes to run a yoga studio. And I think that part of the advantage, like, if for anyone listening is thinking about opening yoga studio, the advantage of getting a coach ahead of time would be the fact that help setting up your fixed costs ahead of time, so that you're not concerned about adding staff in the future. And like you said, Josh, a lot of times people end up too late. So they're 20 months in, they're 3 years in, they still haven't got an assistant manager or desk or what have you. And I think that, there are things that you can put into place from the beginning in your business plan that can really prevent you from getting burned out, maintaining bandwidth, being a leader, and having support. Like, support, in my opinion, should be from day one. You should have support in the studio, and whether you want your teachers to do desk stuff or not, that's up to you, or you can curate that as you choose. But you should plan on, just because you can doesn't mean you should, meaning clean, teach everything, sell everything, all the marketing, etc. And it's kind of a magical thinking. There's this sort of thing inside the yoga world that's like, oh, I can do everything, and I love to teach, I love to practice, and it's going to be amazing. But I think that then they end up really suffering, you know, and we, as you know, we believe you don't need to suffer. But it's as collectively, I don't know how many years we had studios together, a long time. And inevitably we did some suffering ourselves. But at the same time, I think that it's imperative that you set up your company for help, you know, with help and with staff, right? From the beginning.
I like what you're saying, Alex. We've had a lot of conversation in the last 6 months, especially with a lot of people who are like, I'm going to open soon, or I'm starting to plan for opening, or I'm about to open. And we have a whole coaching program specifically for that. And what you're saying, I think, is true. But at any point in business, whether you're about to open up or you've been open for 15 years, 20 years, we have studios like that too. At any moment in time, if you can't see a clear path towards what you're trying to achieve, where you're trying to go, and if that's not defined, then you kind of have to just go back to the drawing board and say, like, what would this look like if it was proper? When you're first starting, it's a lot easier because everything's fresh. When you're going for a while, it's a little bit trickier because you have to keep in balance, not imploding the whole thing and just make the shifts over time. But in either case, clarity of where you're going and then mapping out what would this look like for that to be there. The number one thing I would say, and this is specifically for if you're looking at opening a studio or you're looking at like a second location, would be another example. The number one thing that I see missing, I wouldn't say mistake, but it's missing, is there's no plan for profit and there's no plan for the studio owner to really make money and like have the lifestyle they want. Every person comes and we say, why, cool, you want to open a studio? Like, why do you want to open the studio? And they've got a deep reason personally. They describe a vague idea of their personal lifestyle. We're like, how much are you going to pay yourself? People are like, it'd be nice to get paid, you know, this, but very often we hear an answer like, I don't need to get paid that much. And as long as I can eat and whatever else, and I'm like, that's cool, except think about who you're going to be in 8 years from now and what your lifestyle looks like then and what it can afford you. And like, because that's what we're planning. That's the timeline we're planning it. So you really have to project forward. And if you have the approach, this goes to our start of the conversation today with the teachers too. If you have the approach of the business is small and just does enough and just teaches some good yoga classes, then that's exactly what will happen. And that's fine if that's your objective. If your objective is buy myself a job, cool, and you should do that. There's no problem with that. On the other hand, if you get really deeply honest with yourself, is that really what you want? And if it's not, then we're talking about building a real business, in which case, to Alex's point, especially out of the gate, you've got to plan for how are you going to make the $200,000 a year that you want to make? How are you going to have profit in your business? How are you going to grow it? Like, that's where that planning stuff comes in. Because the obvious stuff is where people focus out of the gate. I'm going to run this many classes. We'll have these teachers. It'll be fun, et cetera, et cetera. Great. But like, that's the stuff that you practically don't have to plan for because it'll just happen organically as soon as you say, I'm opening a yoga studio. It's the deeper stuff around the planning that really has to be there. Go ahead, Terry.
Yeah, I mean, that's exactly when I bought my studio. I didn't open it, but when I bought it, it had to work. I mean, I came in with the sole mission of, yes, I want to own a yoga studio. And at the same time, I had been teaching, you know, supporting myself teaching yoga for almost a decade and putting nothing towards retirement. Right. So I was 53 when I bought my studio. So like I've talked about this, is that I knew from day one, it had to be successful. It had to be profitable. It needed to pay me this much money, and I needed to make up this much money for retirement. And I planned to sell it one day. So from day one, I was working towards my exit strategy. So that's another part of something when you're looking to open a studio. And even if you have had a studio for a while, is what is your exit strategy? At some point, what do you want to do? Now, if you just like want to walk away, that's fine. And certainly there are people that do that, but do you want to walk away with debt? Like if you're still paying for the build out or something like that. So what is the long-term goal? You know, and if you're like in your 20s, maybe it's like, you know what, in 10 years, I want to be able to have someone else running this because I want to have kids and stay home and take it, whatever it is. having that defined end game is really helpful to work towards. And then, like I said, for me, it was like, it was not an option for it not to be able to pay myself, support me, and work towards retirement. And which I did. I accomplished those two things. So, and I think part of it was, I'm like, I didn't do anything that special, you guys. I really didn't. I just followed, a lot of what we coached to. And I can tell you that going back to when I hired my first front desk staff, within a couple of months, my sales had gone up like 35%. They more than paid for themselves. And I thought I was doing well before, but it showed me how much more I could do by having people that were dedicated to certain things that sometimes I wasn't able to get to all the time because I was doing all the other things. And sometimes I'll just, think about this too, is, are there things that you do that you like to do in order to avoid the things you don't like to do? Right. And oftentimes there were things like, I actually love to work my front desk. However, there are other things, larger things that I should be doing that would help grow my business more. And once I realized that, so think about that. Are there things, I have to do this, blah, blah, blah. Is it because you like it and you're avoiding doing something you maybe don't want to do? So there's something to think about too, is when you're looking at tasks and stuff like that. So there's, just food for thought. Josh.
What's the quote from, I think it was maybe last week or the week before, small business owners or passionpreneurs do what they love. Yogapreneurs, real deep level entrepreneurs, learn to love what it takes.
Yeah.
Like, you have to fall in love with your business, not just what your business does. And that's maybe the surprise for some studio owners. They open up very passionate about the product and what it does. And then you might have to find the passion for the business. It's not, you don't have to start there, but you have to be looking at it that way and get passionate about it, because no one else will. Again, you're going to be the source of inspiration.
Yeah.
I just wanted to make a little bit of side comment too. We often talk about exit strategy, and in our sort of Yogapreneur business framework, that area where exit strategy is an option, we call the expansion phase. It's expansion because you're looking at multiple different opportunities that, when you get everything in order, you have in front of you. A sale is one of them, an exit strategy. There's also full automation of the business. It becomes portfolio. You just put someone in place to run it. There's expanding to multiple locations, et cetera, et cetera. There's all sorts of things. But the reason why we name it that way is, to Terry's point, knowing that you're going to get to an expansion moment and knowing what you want it to look like for yourself at that moment, to some extent, it's not that it can't change, really helps you clarify what you need to do now. You can see the path. And we talked about this in the 2019 Yoga Business Summit. It was a big conversation. If you project forward who you are at that moment, then you just ask yourself the question, what would that person do right now today? Like, how does that person behave if the future version of me? And that's how you start to behave in your business now. And that can be a source of inspiration personally for the actions you take and what you do, because we know that there's no such thing as a ceiling in your business. Ceilings are only there as part of the current paradigm of how you operate, both personally and in your business. So if you're capping out, it's because something has to change. And we know that law of attraction, when you start to behave and form a habit around a certain thing, things just happen. They start to come to you. That rant from the other day, one of the points in there is that your next level of business is going to be on the other side of your next level of discipline. Your ability to say, this is the rules, this is how I operate, this is the habit that I have, and just really enacting on that. That's where that stuff comes in. So, all right. I think maybe we've covered staff thoroughly today. We got some other stuff, other meetings to go to, I know, on the team. Any other major things coming up for you guys, Alex, Carol, that we should address on the roundup?
No, not at the moment. Nope.
Yeah. Like I said, this is in the ether. This is the main conversation right now, is this planning stuff, this staff, this inspiration, whatever else. So here's your homework. Go ask your team. Just don't even make it a big hoopla. Just go ask them individually over the next month. Carol, Why are you doing this? What's inspiring about teaching yoga? What's inspiring about being at the front desk? Get them thinking about it, hype them up, be the source of inspiration for them, connect everything to that. Hey, it's really important we follow up with Alex after class because you said that you're here to save people's lives. And we know that Alex is going to need that human to human connection, et cetera, et cetera. There's the simple but ongoing task. All right. Have a great weekend, Yogapreneurs. Questions, comments, thoughts, concerns, whatever, post them down below. We're happy to see them and we'll do more follow-up.
And what are your 2 truths and a lie?
2 truths and a lie. Oh yeah. If you don't know what we're talking about, go find Terry's post and you'll
Go find my
get it right
post.
away.
It's really fun. And you post what you think my lie is. I'm
Love
not
it.
saying.
All right.
Go do some yoga.
Go do some yoga.